What's up everyone, we're back at it again. My name is Brad and welcome back to my channel. If you have a struggling fiddle leaf fig that you want to look like this, I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to do. Before we get into the content, let me invite you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're really close to hitting 900 subscribers and it would be amazing if I could have you along for the journey. Without further ado, let's get into the content. Light, light, light. This is one of the fundamental things that people get wrong when it comes to taking care of the fiddle leaf fig. Medium light, not ideal. Bright indirect light, better. But the best light that you can give your fiddle leaf fig is bright direct sunlight. I'm talking 8 hours plus of direct sunlight a day. Now, the trick here to make sure that your leaves don't scorch is to properly acclimate your tree from indoors to outdoors. By doing this, you'll prevent your leaves from scorching and you'll also help develop the big fiddle-shaped leaves that the fiddle leaf fig is famous for. The more light that your fiddle leaf fig gets, the more likely it is to produce those massive leaves. Now, if you do grow your fiddle leaf fig indoors, as oftentimes most people do, make sure that you give it as much bright indirect sunlight as possible. The more light that it gets, again, the better your tree will produce for you. Can your fiddle leaf fig tolerate medium light? Absolutely, but the growth will be severely stunted. Can it handle low light? Absolutely not. If you can't give your fiddle leaf fig at least medium light, you will be severely disappointed with the type of growth that your fiddle leaf fig is going to produce. Personally, I would recommend that at minimum, you give your fiddle leaf fig bright, indirect sunlight. Soil is one of those things that can be tricky when it comes to taking care of your fiddle leaf fig because you just don't know what the soil should look like. You want your soil to be coarse, but at the same time, you want it to hold on to just enough moisture for your fiddle leaf fig to be able to drink. Personally, I go with the 50-50 mix of perlite as well as potting soil. This gives my fiddle leaf fig the best drainage while also retaining just enough moisture for my fiddle leaf fig to drink. If you find yourself watering too frequently, then chances are that your fiddle leaf fig or the soil in your fiddle leaf fig isn't holding on to enough moisture. If you find that you're watering your fiddle leaf fig every couple of weeks and the soil is still wet, then chances are your fiddle leaf fig is retaining too much moisture. You want to amend your fiddle leaf fig soil with something that will allow for more drainage. If you're getting your fiddle leaf fig from a big box store, chances are that it's not going to have the right soil composition as soon as you get it. What I would recommend that you do, as soon as you get the plant, don't worry about any kind of acclimation, but immediately change that soil composition to a 50-50 mixture of a potting soil perlite. That way your fiddle leaf fig will get rid of the shock or will have all of the shock that it's going to have in that one instant, and it will be able to rebound more quickly and produce the growth that your fiddle leaf fig is going to produce throughout the growing season. This leads us to the next topic, and that is water. Your fiddle leaf fig should be watered when the first few inches of the soil are dry. Now, it will be advisable for you to get some type of water meter because this will allow for you to go deep into the soil to see if it is dry, wet, or somewhere in between. A moisture meter is key when it comes to taking care of a variety of houseplants. Alternatively, you can try to stick your finger into the pot, but your finger will only go so deep, especially if you have a nice substantial root ball. You could also lift your plant up out of its pot to examine the root ball to see how far down the soil is still wet. The problem with this though is when you get a fiddle leaf fig that becomes very substantial in size, it becomes a bit more challenged to lift that root ball up out of its pot. So I would recommend that you get some type of moisture meter that you can use to check your fiddle leaf fig soil about once a week to see how wet or dry the soil is. You want to wait for the first few inches again for your soil to get dry, and once those first few inches are dry, make sure that you give your fiddle leaf fig a nice drink of water. This means that you want the soil to become super saturated and you want the water to drain out of the bottom of the pot. With that being said, you want to make sure that you also pot your fiddle leaf fig or really any plant in a pot that has drainage holes, because you want to give your plant the ability to shed all of that excess water as opposed to letting your plant sitting in a pool of water and developing root rot. If you can't find a pot without drainage holes, whatever you do, do not put any kind of coarse material at the bottom of the pot hoping that it will aid in drainage. It will not aid in drainage, and in fact, it will lead to root rot more quickly than not. This is because it takes a while for water to flow from that very fine material of the soil to the coarser material of the pebbles or rock. In fact, the coarser the material, the more difficult it is for that water to travel from the fine to the coarse. What you should do is you should drill a hole in a pot, be it ceramic, be it plastic, be it whatever it is, whatever the material is, you should drill a hole in it and allow for that water to be able to shed more easily. If you like videos like this and want to continue to see more videos about houseplant tips and tricks, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. It's totally free and would mean a lot. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to taking care of these fiddle leaf figs. One of the common things that you'll notice when your fiddle leaf fig is beginning to grow and develop new leaves is that some of the leaves will have red spotting. This is totally normal and it's called edema. The edema is the result of uneven watering, and it's a bit difficult to have a fiddle leaf fig in any really houseplant and water very evenly without having your plant suffer from something like root rot. The edema is essentially the cells within your fiddle leaf fig leaves. It's bursting. Now, as the plant or as the leaf becomes more mature, you'll notice that that edema will essentially disappear. So if this is something that you see with your fiddle leaf fig, do not panic. Don't change anything. Don't change the lighting. Don't change the watering. Don't change the soil. Your fiddle leaf fig will be absolutely fine. When it comes to leaves too of your fiddle leaf fig, if your fiddle leaf fig isn't getting the proper light, you'll notice that your leaves will become deformed or they'll be small. If your fiddle leaf fig isn't being watered properly, you'll also notice that your leaves will begin to droop. If you want to get your fiddle leaf fig to have these nice, beautiful, upright leaves, you want to make sure that you not only give it the right amount of light, but that you also give it the right amount of water. Because if you don't, and those leaves begin to droop, it unfortunately isn't going to be likely that your leaves will become more upright again. Now, let's talk about repotting your fiddle leaf fig. Again, when it comes to repotting your fiddle leaf fig, the type of soil that you should use would be a 50-50 mixture of something like a perlite as well as a potting soil. This will give you the best drainage, but also retain just the right amount of water. You'll know this time to repot your fiddle leaf fig when your leaves are starting to get smaller and smaller. Your fiddle leaf fig does like to stretch out. There's a myth that fiddle leaf figs like to be root bound, and that's not the case at all. Oftentimes, people like to keep their plants root bound because it makes it more difficult to do something like overwatering. Unfortunately, when your plant becomes root bound and it doesn't have enough soil in the pot, it makes it more challenging to thoroughly water your plant, and it also makes it more challenging to do things such as fertilize and feed your plant. So if you notice that your fiddle leaf fig has those smaller leaves, or if your fiddle leaf fig is severely root bound, then it's time for you to repot your fiddle leaf fig. Now, when you decide on what to do with your fiddle leaf fig, or if you are trying to decide what type of pot to use, I recommend that you go with a pot that is more deep than it is wide. The deeper the pot, the better for your fiddle leaf fig, because it likes to send roots downward in order to help with stability. This will also help you get those big leaves as well. If you find yourself going with a wider pot, that's fine too, but you might find yourself needing to repot again more soon. A wider pot, totally fine, but I do recommend you getting a deeper pot instead. Humidity is oftentimes something that you hear houseplant enthusiasts stressing when it comes to not only your fiddle leaf fig, but also other tropical houseplants that they might have in their collection. While having a higher humidity is great for a lot of your tropical houseplants, this isn't necessary in order to keep your fiddle leaf fig or really any of your tropical houseplants happy. If you keep your plant indoors, the humidity of your indoor environment will be just fine for your fiddle leaf fig. Sure, you don't want to have a humidity level of 10, 20, 30%, but that's also a humidity level that's uncomfortable for you as well. So just remember this: if you are comfortable in your house, your fiddle leaf fig will be comfortable in your house as well. Now, I do have to tell you that I do keep this fiddle leaf fig outside during the spring and summertime, where the humidity levels are a bit higher than indoors. Outside, the humidity can be about 70-75% on average, and inside my house, the humidity level is about 50%. When I do bring my fiddle leaf fig from the outside to inside, it really doesn't get any kind of shock. It does just fine. So going from outdoors to indoors, your fiddle leaf fig will be just okay. It doesn't do any kind of leaf drop or any kind of sap behavior. Just bring it inside and watch your fiddle leaf fig continue to thrive. So you've had your fiddle leaf fig for a while, and you've noticed that your fiddle leaf fig really hasn't put on any kind of new growth, and you want to know, how can you promote new growth? Well, there are a couple of things that you can do. The first thing you can do is you can check to make sure that your fiddle leaf fig has enough light. Again, your fiddle leaf fig likes bright, direct sunlight, especially when kept outdoors, but if it's indoors, at minimum it should get bright, indirect sunlight. If it gets medium light, then your fiddle leaf fig most likely will just maintain. It won't produce any kind of new growth, but it will continue to survive. So first things first, check to make sure that you're giving your fiddle leaf fig enough light. The second thing that you can do, and that you probably should be doing anyway, is fertilizing your Fiddle Leaf Fig. Fiddle Leaf Figs like a fertilizer that has an NPK ratio of 3:1:2. This will allow for your Fiddle Leaf Fig to put on the great upward top growth, as well as continuing to develop the healthy root system below the soil as well. So make sure that you give your Fiddle Leaf Fig the proper amount of fertilizer, and make sure that you give your Fiddle Leaf Fig just enough light as well. The other thing that you can do is you can also prune your Fiddle Leaf Fig, which brings us to the next topic of how to get branches for your Fiddle Leaf Fig. There are two primary ways that you can get branching on your Fiddle Leaf Fig. There's a third, which is a bit more challenging. The first thing that you can do is you can prune your Fiddle Leaf Fig. By topping off the growth of your Fiddle Leaf Fig at an internode, it essentially encourages outward growth from your Fiddle Leaf Fig. So instead of your vertical growth, it will produce horizontal branching. Now, when you do your chop, you want to make sure that you're giving your Fiddle Leaf Fig enough fertilizer before the chopping is occurring, as well as after the chopping is occurring, and enough light, because the more light and the better fertilizer that your Fiddle Leaf Fig is getting, the more likely it is to throw out multiple branches as opposed to just a singular branch. The next thing that you can do in order to encourage branching for your Fiddle Leaf Fig is to notch. Notching is a bit more of a challenge, or a bit more of an advanced technique, and what that requires is to basically cut a notch at an internode along the branch or the trunk of your Fiddle Leaf Fig. What you'll notice is that you'll have branches that develop below and above where the notch point is. This essentially tricks your Fiddle Leaf Fig into thinking that it has been chopped when it hasn't been chopped at all. The third way that you can get branching, which again is a bit more challenging, is to make sure that you give your Fiddle Leaf Fig enough light. By blasting it with enough light, your Fiddle Leaf Fig will naturally choose to branch because it wants to produce additional leaves so it can take in all of that light that it's getting from its environment. So those are the steps, tricks, and tips to get your Fiddle Leaf Fig to look like this. If you have any other questions, leave them in the comment section and I will happily answer them. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you found it helpful, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching. Again, my name is Brad, and I'll see you on the next one.